A woman walks into the room, already carrying the weight of her day. Her voice is tight, her frustration barely contained. Something happened at work. Someone said something they shouldn't have. A situation didn't go her way. She starts talking, not slowly, not carefully, but in a rush, like she's trying to release pressure before it builds any further. Across from her, a man listens. At first, he nods. He follows the details. He pieces together the situation like a puzzle. And somewhere in the middle of her explanation, something clicks in his mind. He sees it, the solution, clear, practical, efficient. So he does what he believes is right. He offers it, and almost instantly, everything shifts. Her expression tightens. Her tone changes. The frustration that was aimed at the situation is now directed at him. Why do you always try to fix everything? I don't want solutions. I just want you to listen. And in that moment, both of them feel misunderstood. She feels unheard. He feels rejected for trying to help. And neither of them realizes they are not speaking the same language. That moment isn't rare. It's not unique to one relationship, one couple, or one situation. It's a pattern, a repeating loop that plays out in millions of interactions, quietly creating distance where there was supposed to be connection. From her perspective, the problem isn't the situation she described, it's how she feels about it. The frustration, the disappointment, the emotional residue. When she speaks, she's not just transferring information, she's trying to process, to be understood, to feel supported in that emotional state. The act of talking is in itself part of the resolution. But from his perspective, talking is not resolution. Talking is input. And once enough input is gathered, the next logical step is output, a solution. So when she explains what happened, he listens just long enough to identify the core issue. He filters out what matters, organizes it, and moves toward action. Because in his mind, if the problem can be solved, then the negative emotion attached to it disappears. Fix the cause, eliminate the effect. Simple. Except it isn't. Because when he moves too quickly into solving, she experiences it as interruption, as dismissal, as if the emotional weight of what she just shared was either too much or not important enough to sit with. And when she resists his solution, he experiences that as irrational, even ungrateful, because from his point of view, he is doing exactly what someone who cares should do. He's trying to help. This is where the friction begins. Not because either side is wrong, but because both are operating on different problem-solving systems. And what makes this dynamic even more complicated is that over time, one system has been increasingly labeled as correct. In recent decades, a particular idea has gained traction subtly at first, then widely accepted that listening, validating, and emotionally processing is not just one way to deal with problems, but the right way, the healthier way, the more evolved way. You see it everywhere, in therapy culture, in self-help spaces, in relationship advice. The message repeats itself in different forms. Listen more, validate more, feel more. And while there is truth in that, because understanding does require listening, something else has happened alongside it. The line between understanding a problem and solving it has been blurred. Listening, in many cases, has been elevated from a step in the process to the entire process itself. And this creates a subtle but powerful shift in expectations. Now, when a man does what he is naturally inclined to do, move towards solutions, he is often seen as doing it wrong, as lacking emotional intelligence, as being disconnected. But from his internal framework, none of that is true. He is engaging with the problem directly. He is trying to remove the obstacle. He is attempting to produce a real-world result that improves the situation. And when that effort is not only rejected but criticized, it doesn't just confuse him, it conditions him. Over time, he starts to second-guess his instincts. He hesitates before offering solutions. He filters himself. He replaces action with passive listening, not because he believes it works better, but because he has learned that it is expected, that it avoids conflict. And slowly, something begins to shift, not just in the interaction, but in his identity within the relationship. Because when someone is repeatedly told, explicitly or implicitly, that their natural way of handling problems is wrong, they don't just change behavior, they adjust who they are. And in this case, what's being adjusted is a core strength. Men, in general, are wired towards solution-oriented thinking, not because they don't understand emotions, but because they prioritize outcomes. They measure effectiveness by results. Did the problem get resolved? Did the situation improve? If yes, then the approach was valid. But when that approach is suppressed, replaced with a model that doesn't align with their strengths, the result is not balance, it's dilution. And this is where a deeper issue emerges. Because when one side of a relationship is encouraged to abandon its strengths in favor of the other's preferences, the relationship doesn't become stronger, it becomes less complementary. Instead of two different systems working together, you end up with two people trying to operate the same way, often less effectively. Think about it like this. If one person is naturally good at identifying problems and executing solutions, and the other is naturally good at emotional processing and relational awareness, then together they cover more ground. They handle both the internal and external dimensions of life. But if the problem solver is trained to stop solving and instead mimic emotional processing, you don't gain anything new. You just lose efficiency in one area without significantly improving the other. And yet, this dynamic continues to repeat because the expectation remains that he should listen longer, that he should validate more, that he should respond not as a man, but as something else entirely. And that expectation carries a message, whether it's intended or not. Not be better, but be different. Not add this, but replace that. And over time, that message doesn't just create confusion, it creates quiet resentment because helping for him meant solving. And now solving is no longer welcome. When that pattern repeats often enough, something subtle but significant begins to happen beneath the surface of the relationship. He stops leaning in, not dramatically, not all at once, but gradually. At first, he still listens, he still nods, but there's a hesitation now, a calculation. He's no longer fully engaged in the way he used to be because the part of him that wants to act, the part that wants to step in and fix, to improve, to resolve, has been conditioned to stay quiet. And when that part goes quiet, something else goes with it. His sense of purpose in the interaction, because for him, contribution is tied to usefulness. If he can't help move things forward, then what exactly is his role? To sit there and absorb, to mirror emotions without changing outcomes? That's not how he's wired to create value. So he adapts. He listens longer than he naturally would. He withholds solutions even when they're obvious to him. He replaces clarity with neutrality. And on the surface, it looks like progress. Fewer arguments, less immediate tension. But underneath, there's a trade-off. He becomes less invested because when someone is repeatedly discouraged from using their strengths, they don't just suppress behavior, they disengage from the domain entirely. And in a relationship, that domain is problem solving, leadership, direction. At the same time, she feels something too. Even though she asks for listening instead of solutions, something about the interaction starts to feel incomplete, less grounded, because while emotional validation can soothe, it doesn't always resolve. The problem still exists. The situation hasn't changed. So now, instead of one frustration, there are two. The original issue and the lack of movement around it, and neither side fully understands why the dynamic feels off. This is the paradox. Trying to reshape someone into what you think you need can quietly remove the very thing that made them valuable in the first place. Because what was interpreted as not listening was often just listening with a purpose. And what was interpreted as cold or dismissive was often just efficient. But once those traits are suppressed, you don't get a more emotionally attuned version of the same person. You get a reduced version, less decisive, less proactive, less engaged. And this doesn't just affect small conversations, it compounds over time. Because relationships are built not just on emotional exchange, but on functional outcomes, handling challenges, navigating pressure, making decisions that move both people forward. If one person is strong in emotional processing and the other is strong in execution, that's not a flaw, that's structure, that's complementarity. And when that structure is respected, both people benefit. She gets access to someone who can take complex, messy situations and turn them into clear, actionable steps, someone who can remove obstacles instead of just discussing them. He gets space to operate in the way that feels natural to him, which increases his sense of competence, his engagement, and ultimately his investment in the relationship. But when that structure is denied, when one side is expected to abandon its strengths, the system breaks down, not immediately, but predictably. This is why it's often more effective to amplify strengths than to correct perceived weaknesses. If someone is already good at something that produces results, refining that ability creates exponential value. But trying to transform them into something they are not usually leads to mediocrity at best. Think of it in practical terms. If someone can throw with precision but struggles to catch, you don't force them into a role that depends on catching. You position them where their strength matters most. You build around it. The same logic applies here. If he is naturally inclined towards solving problems, then that is not a trait to suppress, it's a resource to develop. Because a highly capable problem solver doesn't just improve individual situations, he improves the overall stability of the relationship. He reduces friction, he anticipates issues, he creates outcomes. And when that capability is encouraged instead of resisted, something shifts. He leans in again, not because he's told to, but because he sees that his contribution is both accepted and effective. At the same time, expectations become clearer. And if she brings a problem to him, there is an implicit understanding he will try to solve it, not ignore it, not just sit with it, but engage with it in the way he knows how. And that creates alignment because now both people understand the rules of the interaction. If she wants emotional validation without solutions, there are other spaces for that, friends, conversations that are explicitly framed that way. But when she comes to him with a problem, she is also opening the door to action. And that's not a limitation, that's precision. It allows each person to operate in their strengths instead of constantly negotiating roles. And over time, that clarity removes a lot of unnecessary conflict. Because the issue was never that one person didn't care, it was that care was being expressed in different languages, one through emotion, the other through action. And once that distinction is understood, the question is no longer why doesn't he listen? It becomes what is he actually trying to do when he does? At a certain point, the confusion fades and the pattern becomes clear. He was never trying to dismiss her. He was trying to fix what was causing her pain. And she was never trying to reject his help. She was trying to be felt before anything changed. Two intentions, both valid, but misaligned in execution. The mistake was never in caring, it was in expecting the same expression of care. Because when a woman expects a man to respond like her friends do, she's not asking for more connection. She's asking him to step outside his nature. And when he complies too often, he doesn't become better, he becomes less effective. A relationship doesn't improve when differences are erased. It improves when they are used correctly. If he is strong in solving, let him solve. If he brings clarity, let him bring it. That is where his value compounds. And if she needs to be heard, she should be clear about that, but also intentional about where she seeks it. Because the moment both people stop trying to reshape each other and start working with what's already there, the friction disappears. Not because the differences are gone, but because they finally make sense.